How is it going, everyone? Hopefully you're having a good Friday. Thanks so much for checking out Citizen Pete. I am here with Follow the Leader for a discussion this Friday, an interview Friday. I've decided to kind of switch Citizen Pete to do mostly interviews on Fridays. So this is the first one. What's going on, man? How you doing?
Doing all right. It's been easy today so far.
Exactly. It's been actually kind of nice, chill Friday. It's been a very crazy week in politics for the last couple weeks, obviously. So it's been nice to, seem like it's kind of slowing down a little bit.
Yeah,
I'm all about.
I don't know, whatever normal is or was. They're definitely that.
It is. It is kind of a very big question of what is normal nowadays? Like what's, where are we going to go from here? Especially, it seemed like a lot of folks in the media or online, and like they spent the whole time just attacking Trump, and now what's going to kind of come next? So it's interesting times for sure.
I'm sure they'll be just as heavy-handed. They're already asking about what colors are they going to change things in the White House. It's journalism at its finest.
Yeah. I heard the blue rug is back apparently, but. Which I didn't know they changed it. Who knows? Who cares? But yeah, man, I first want to start things off with bringing up your book. So tell us a little bit about that.
That's the blue collar blind spot. I'm a Bible college dropout that became an electrician, and I started really paying attention, having a blue collar perspective that we're kind of an unreached people group, which is pastor lingo for we're not being directly communicated the gospel to. And it's not exactly so dire, but it makes good rhetoric to kind of direct the point that most of the time when you hear a pastor applying a sermon, they're going to talk about, how to bring this to Monday morning. And it's going to be the 9 to 5. They're going to talk about, usually they'll talk about cubicles and break rooms and water coolers and stuff. And that's almost all the time. When you work on a construction site and your daily fare is, porta johns and pickup trucks, it's unintentionally alienating. They're not really communicating to you directly in a way. You're having to keep bridging this language gap or a culture gap sometimes when they'll complain about how waking up at 6 in the morning is hard. I get up at 5 in the morning, 4 in the morning when I get to 3 in the morning. Sorry, I have to be at work by 5, so I got to get up at 3, 4 in the morning when I get to sleep in. So
that's a rough schedule for sure. But
it's just a culture difference.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I do think it is interesting, kind of pointing out that concept of trying to kind of get things from the Bible itself and trying to connect to our day-to-day lives. And that's the thing I kind of always find most interesting when kind of discussing anything related to religion.
Yes, it's where the rubber meets the road is the important part. One of the goals that I have with my channel is to try and make what seems like high-level theology or crazy complicated Greek and Hebrew more simple, because it's not that complicated. If you can read and write English, Greek and Hebrew are the same thing. They're just different squiggles that make different noises. And once you understand some of the basic parts, they kind of go together like Lego bricks. And even then, the Strong's numbers, you don't even have to understand Greek and Hebrew. You can just follow the numbers. So you can do a word study when your pastor mentions some random Greek word, and you can go, oh, hey, look at that. It's the same word that's also used by Jesus somewhere else. And with online resources. Good.
Oh, yeah. No, I said that definitely makes sense. And that's one of the things I've always kind of found interesting about the Bible is for me, I kind of didn't grow up with a very religious background. And so I've heard all these kind of stories, and I thought they were more kind of, parables or this idea that, okay, here's how you relate this to modern day. But it also seems like there's people who are, this is word for word literal, like this is exactly what the Bible means. Like, where do you kind of draw that line between this is what this exactly says, or here's what the meaning they were trying to get?
That's an excellent question, and it's definitely its own hours and hours of conversation, and there's volumes
Well, I'll
written on
say
it.
thanks. I don't have good questions all the time, but there we go.
Yeah, it's me personally, because there's what the book says and what the book is being written about. So as far as the text of the Bible, in order to be a Christian, the only logical, consistent way that I see is assuming that the Bible is a historical narrative that is historically accurate, and the narrative that it relates then applies to everyone for all time. When it comes to an individual passage, where Jesus is saying, "Turn the other cheek," or if judge not, unless you will be judged. Those sorts of verses, you have the exact wording that's there, but like all language, there's a deeper understanding that can be drawn from just understanding the language. The Bible is not some ancient, deep, mystic, esoteric book. Jesus's followers were illiterate fishermen. A fun word study in the book of Acts. I think it's about chapter 4. Peter and James get arrested, and the guys are describing them as illiterate. The word in Greek is agrammatos, meaning no letters. They're actually illiterate, and that's the people he trusted the gospel with. He's like, they'll figure it out. They're fine. So it's not,
Nice.
when you approach the Bible, it's not complicated. Most of the complication comes from either thinking a little too hard or not taking enough time to really process what happened, and or there's the language and historical barrier that comes from just having to research stuff and kind of bridge that.
And one thing I also think is something I personally face is that, again, not growing up with a religious background, it seems so daunting. Like there's so much to it. And I think one of the interesting things about the Bible, when you look at it, and some of the things that seem very, like well thought out. For example, as you mentioned, Jesus kind of bringing around people who were not that well educated, or who were, in some cases, I guess, illiterate, and having it be part of his disciples. Kind of maybe that's a lesson to the rest of us that, hey, you don't have to be a theological scholar to, check out what's going on here.
Exactly. Especially with stuff nowadays. In 5 minutes, I can check a pastor's Greek reference, and not just in the Bible, but also in literary Greek sources. And it's all free online resources, and you don't actually even have to know Greek to do it. Blue Letter Bible app is free. And then you go to interlinear, and then you go down to the word that he mentioned, and then it has a little Strong's number, and you hit that, and it'll now show you every verse in the Bible where that one word shows up. So you can get a fuller idea of how this word is used throughout the Bible, and kind of the thought behind it as the different authors use the same word in different contexts. And even then, you just take that word and you copy paste it over to Project Perseus. Tufts University, Project Perseus, just Google it. And Greek word study tool. Project Perseus Greek word study tool. Google that and it'll pull up, and you just paste the Greek letter squiggles that you don't even understand into Project Perseus, and now you can look at what Epictetus used the word for or something. Or depending on they have the Loeb's internet, the Loeb library on there, which is a ton of random Greek resources. But the main thing is
it
being able to
this right here
in the secular lexicon. Bam! Yeah, that's it, man. Tufts Digital Library. You've got to go through a few hoops to find the exact Greek word study tool. I've done it enough that it's in my Google recommended when I start typing up Perseus. But there'll be there'll be like a little keyboard too, so you don't even have to have Greek fonts installed on your computer if you were gonna like type it in letter by letter. But so that thing at the right will be a search of the names of the resources. There's a
up here in the right upper hand corner.
Yeah, there's a
Makes sense.
That's for the titles and of authors and stuff. It's the Tufts Greek. You want the Greek word study tool is the name to Google, and it'll get you to the a search bar for just that. But anyway, it's all free,
sense.
And in like 2 minutes, boop, with just copy and pasting the correct word chunk over, it'll tell you, oh, this is the aorist, whatever, and then you can Google what aorist means, and then realize your pastor didn't exactly use that Greek word right, but he's trying. He's a busy guy. He's got a lot going on.
He does, and it is kind of funny whenever I've working with churches and stuff, and they'll reference certain passages and certain books, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I have no clue how to spell Deuteronomy. You're gonna have to give me a hand with that one, or Philippians is a bit challenging. But yeah, it's cool. There's a lot of resources out there.
I always mess Philippians up. I grew up in church, and I mess Philippians up all the time. I can never remember if it's 1 or 2 L's and how many P's there are. I think it's I always guess wrong. It's either 2 L's and 1 P or 1 P and 2 L's. The Philippians, the second P, I think it's double. Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, I won't make you try to spell it live on air because that no one's gonna like watching that. But
Bible spelling.
And as we kind of pivot things around, talking politics here, as someone who's kind of, or I should say, when you look at the incoming Biden administration from kind of a I just made that word up. Religious perspective.
I like it.
I mean, are you happy that we're having this new administration, or are you worried about what's going to happen in the future? Like, what are your thoughts as Biden takes office?
So, from a scientific perspective, cells with a distinct DNA that are self-replicating is life. So any fertilized egg is life by definition. So abortions take life. That's a fact. It's actually murder because you're extinguishing a human life because it's inconvenient. Most of the time, obviously there are medical ones to save the life of the mom. That's not ever the conversation that's being had for people who are trying to push policy nowadays, where they're saying it's a fundamental human right. It gets crazy. So the biggest thing too with the Biden administration is Biden keeps being sold as Catholic, but the actual teaching of the Catholic Church is that abortion is murder, and it's wrong. But it's one of the pillars of his campaign.
I do think, actually, as you mentioned that, it's interesting that I saw today that Biden does have a picture of the Pope in his in the Oval Office now. I think he's only the second Roman Catholic to get elected. But and I'm on the different side of this. I am pro-choice myself, and I think that one of the things that I like about Biden, I think people should try to like more about politicians, is that he has his own and he's talked about this, having his own personal beliefs on abortion. But he's also recognizing that we should have, separation, church and state. And if he was to move to try to outlaw abortion for a lot of people, that would be enforcing his own religious kind of views on a bunch of people, which, is definitely wrong in politics. And I've always challenged people on this to think about, we live in a Christian-dominated society, Christian, that's the dominant religion in the United States. But you go to other places, and it's not. And the Christians in that area would not like it if, things like, Sharia law were enforced, that people are always saying. And so I think it's very important to have that separation there between, church and the state.
It is difficult. The line is great because one of the religious teaching is that murder is wrong. And so it's where is that line between, well, yeah, we all kind of agree that. So then defining murder and defining wrong, and those the definitions that you bring to that are going to be determined largely by your religious outlook, and it's kind of the first barrier. Governing a mixed religious group is difficult, but at the same time, all legislative opinions are still kind of a moral basis. It's just how loose is the moral framework, and where exactly each sort of nuanced line is drawn. And I think, though, definitionally abortion is murder. And so at that point, then it's not about a policy discussion. It's about murder needs to be specifically and clearly defined for where a human life begins. Because if a pregnant woman is a double homicide, then an unborn child is alive and a human that shouldn't be ever, as our wonderful Virginia governor keeps trying to get them to be allowed to be aborted on the table almost. It's the boundaries have been, it's very far from a safe, rare, and legal was, I think, the Clintons mantra.
Oh, I can't remember that specific one. But I do think, well, yeah, two things that you kind of break up there. That I think when the polling on abortion is that a lot of people are in favor of it in general. Obviously, people have a different perspective on the timing of the abortion. Most people are not a fan of, obviously, the late-term abortions, and the vast majority of those are for medical reasons. And again, I believe that, if it's your decision to have that child, and risk the medical problems, then hey, you should have the right to do that. But it shouldn't be a decision that the government makes, especially in the case of a life-threatening scenario, because I'd have a hard time telling me, hey, I have to risk my life for something to do it without my choice. And the other thing that I want to mention as you break up there is, as we talk about that difference between, where, for you it's death, or for you that is a life, and the idea of taking it as murder. But I think in that political discussion about separating church and state, that we have to use science to try to help make these decisions. And scientifically, we don't look at a life as a heartbeat. We look at it as the brain waves. That's why taking someone off life support isn't murder, because we picture that brain wave. That's when life is beginning. And the barometer right now were to ban late-term abortions. I think it's like, okay, I'm not sure which trimester there, but it's at that point to when the fetus actually starts developing brainwaves. And so, I mean, that's just kind of how I, look at it. And that's how I think about it myself, is that it's not, for me, it's not necessarily murder, because it hasn't taken that universally, I should say, scientifically next step to become, a person or a citizen, I should say.
Gotcha. I was sticking strictly with the definition of life, which is the scientifically derived, it has a distinct DNA from its mother at the moment it's fertilized, before it implants in the uterine wall. It's self-replicating cells with a distinct genetic code.
Makes sense. And yeah, if anyone's watching this, you've just learned a little
bit
bit more about how life, you've just learned more about how pregnancy begins. If anyone's watching, the stork is not involved, as they say. But we can kind of move on from the abortion debate, because it's one of those things. I've also realized that people kind of have their own opinions on it, and it's hard to find universal consensus there. The next thing I kind of want to talk about is, I actually talked with my pastor, and he talked a little about the history of the church and politics. And one of the things he talked about is back when Reagan came in office, the religious right, obviously a lot of the policies that Reagan had around religion were very popular at the time, including things around abortion, right? But as things have changed, as societies have changed, things like abortion and gay marriage are more accepted now, it has maybe become more of a detriment to the church and expanding, because now a lot of people look at the church as being against all of these things.
So it's difficult to use the word the church as sort of a single spectrum, because every
monolithic.
Individual denominations have their own teaching. But in general, the sort of the founding point, the reason you use the Bible, 3 or 4,000 year old book, depending on the book you're reading, within the Bible, it's the whole point is it doesn't change, because humans don't change and God doesn't change. We've been humans the whole time, and everybody sucks, and that's part of it. That's why we need Jesus. And so the rules are they're extracted from understanding why God made mankind and what our purpose is here. And so then we live in a way that is in accordance with what we see God finds pleasing, and avoiding things that God finds as an abomination. And so then it doesn't matter what's culturally relevant, because the difficulty with using that as a metric is the cultural relevance train doesn't stop. You get on that train, there's no next stop. You stay on that train forever. If murder becomes socially acceptable, if pedophilia becomes socially acceptable, Netflix is really pushing that very hard with the whole cuties thing. If it becomes socially acceptable, then we just need to change with the times. There's no logical barrier to say no, this is enough. This is when it's done. And so the Bible becomes that baseline for Christianity.
And I'm glad you actually kind of brought up the cuties thing. And I think this is another point that, I mean, obviously pedophilia is horribly wrong, and that should never be in any way considered acceptable. And I think, the cuties documentary is an interesting one, is that, it was obviously across the line for a lot of people. And I remember I went on a religious retreat. It was like a men's retreat, and it was an interesting conversation to just kind of randomly walk into, but it was this whole concept around, premarital sex and all this kind of stuff. And, on one half really the majority of the folks there were a bit older, right? And they talked about having, abstaining from all that stuff until they got married. That's what the Bible says. And they're basically telling the younger guy there, hey, that's what you need to do. But also not recognizing that this younger guy is living in a world that doesn't exist anymore. Like for example, one of the guys there brought up the Super Bowl, and how he was disgusted by the Super Bowl performance last year with J-Lo. I can't remember the other performer there, but they thought it was overtly sexual. And I think one of the interesting things from that is that when Janet Jackson had the whole, Michael Jackson, Justin Timberlake thing back in the day, the FCC got 500,000 complaints. And last year's Super Bowl, they got 1,500. And so it seems like society's definitely moving in a very different direction. And obviously, the church is kind of in a hard place where it's like they don't want to adjust to that, but also sometimes it seems like they have a harder time connecting with younger people who live in a different world, frankly.
It is important to adjust the messaging, but the difference is the message doesn't change, right? The McDonald's commercials, if you look at them from like 1940 to now, they're still selling you a burger. The fundamental message hasn't changed, even though they're night and day different commercials. And so in the properly done Christianity, you're going to use the Bible as your baseline, but your messaging needs to change. Fundamentally, it's about why. I mean, we don't just follow these rules because a random old book tells us to. We follow this random old book because it's the best explanation for reality that I've been able to find. And many of the best thinkers in Western civilization, there's a reason they didn't feel like any apologetics were necessary, because it was absurd to view to hold any other meta narrative, because none of them really check out to objective reality the way Christianity does. And so when you look at what the Bible puts forward as being the best way to live, only having one sexual partner until you're dead and having children with that sexual partner is the best way to do it, and avoiding multiple sexual partners, because it's just, you can see it happen. Anybody who has more than one baby mama knows it's a huge problem. It's a huge headache. Now you're trying to get custody with kids. Now you're in the court system. It's practically speaking a terrible idea. Not
absolutely.
To mention
and
emotional attachments and stuff.
Absolutely. And for me, it's one of those things of like, the general idea is good, right? The idea of abstaining and all that stuff is, it's good, but as you're right, it seems like sometimes the messaging hasn't just adjusted with the times. Because we live in a different world. Like I have a lot of friends who were absolutely disgusted by the song WAP. I can't say the name of it on the show. I think YouTube might take me out. Are you familiar with that with Cardi B?
I honestly don't listen to that. I don't listen to a lot of any music though. I'm a boring person.
I You might want to check it out. I don't know. If you want to make sure. I don't know if you have any kids or anything. Make sure they're not searching that up. But yeah, it's just one of those weird times where it seems like there's definitely still a lot of folks out there, Christian folks, who want to kind of raise their kids in this Christ-centered kind of way. But then this song that is literally called "Wet Ass." You can figure out the last name. It's like one of the most popular songs in America, and it's just like a very weird.
I guess we always.
I mean, it's a crazy kind of thing.
It's kind of it's weird. I'll drop a Bible quote. Ecclesiastes. Solomon constantly says, "There's nothing new under the sun in all the days of man's vanity on the earth. There's nothing new under the sun." Because if you look at like all of the old classic music, you go to the old people and what they like, and they're like, yeah, ragtime. Ragtime was named after a woman's period. What jazz music is, jazz is slang for semen.
I didn't know
it's
that
never
part.
not been foul. Yeah, it's never not been foul. Rock and roll, famously, that's a euphemism for having sex. It's never not been gross and licentious. We've just dialing up how extreme we are about showing it, but it's always been this on the edge of sexual indulgence. But it's because of what sells. Largely, the message of the church is it's just like a spiritual version of diet and exercise, right? And it's the Atkins diet, or it's the new P90X, or it's a Bowflex, or a Total Gym, like. It's still exercise. It's still, get up and do hard things until you're tired, and then you feel better and you're more healthy. Christianity and the Bible propose a spiritual life that is going to allow your spirit to be healthy. I think it's to me, it seems obvious why there's such skyrocketing rates of depression and anxiety, and people are talking about, well, I need self-care now, or, psychiatry is going through the roof as far as a profession goes, and counseling, and suddenly all these people have life coaches now, which are basically counselors. Well, it's because they're not spiritually healthy, because they didn't, read your Bible, pray every day, and you grow, as the children's church song says.
Well, there you go. Yeah, it definitely does seem like there's a lot of, things with depression and stuff nowadays. For me personally, I think it's one of those things that maybe society is more open to talk about it. But I also think it is funny that Elvis went from like the devil's music to classic rock, right? And even in my own church, it's very funny that you go to the 8 o'clock and it's very it's very traditional, all the hymns and stuff, and then you go to the 11 o'clock and it's like it's like a rock and roll concert, and the blue hairs, as they call them at the church, they're like, that's the devil's music at 11 a.m. and it's just kind of a funny it's just kind of funny. The church in itself is trying to find that balance, I guess.
Yeah, it is a difficult balance to find, but I've decided a long time ago that's how I'll know I'm old, is I'll turn it on to an AM oldie station and I'll hear Eminem and just be like, I guess I'm finally old.
Yeah, I mean, it's coming. Let me tell you, it's coming. So one of the things I kind of noticed that when I first kind of brought up, Biden taking over, the first thing you kind of brought up in your mind was abortion. And so is that kind of like a main key kind of interest or something that you're, when you look at politics, is stuff around abortion rights? Is that like a very big thing for you?
That's for me personally. That's the biggest policy focus, because like that's the religious belief, is that's murder, that's baby murder. So that's basically then when that's the biggest issue. So it's hard to have, to not be a single issue voter. It's like, which party's against baby murder? I'll take that one. They like guns too? Good deal.
Well, little babies and guns, I wouldn't put the two of them together at the same time, but
babies are terrible dots.
And so that's as we're talking about the 46th president, seems like that's why people were very into Trump, is because they thought that he was going to potentially end abortion. I don't want to suggest if you voted for him, but was that something that would maybe would attract someone like yourself who views abortion as such a very important thing to potentially voting for someone like Trump?
Yes, that's a lot of Christians. They're just like, well, basically, where they stand on like guns or other stuff. They're like, well, abortion is murder, so we need that to be solved first. Then we can talk about welfare and all of the other different policies or foreign policy. Like, well, can we get baby murder? Can we stop that? There's a lot of Christians that are in that camp.
Sure. And one of the things I have often thought that was surprising, with political and Trump getting so much political support, is that people they think he's going to end abortion, that being a big thing. But then, we also got to talk about the lives that are already here. In the southern border, kids coming over, being put in cages. For me, that was, just kind of shocking to see in America. And I was surprised that a lot of folks on the conservative side didn't immediately stop supporting Trump when, he's taking kids who are already here and separating them from their parents. As we sit here now, I think there's it's over 500 kids who are essentially never going to see their parents again because they were separated at the border. Was that kind of a line for you, or?
So that's difficult to answer, because for one, the issue of abortion is still on the table. What happens functionally in the argument is well, what about lives here? And they start talking about welfare system, and they miss the fact that both things can be issues at the same time. I think it's very terrible that the Obama era policy that resulted in building those cages, and then the Democrat federal judge that blocked Trump's order to stop doing that, those are both upsetting things. At the same time, they don't know if those children are actually with their parents. A lot of the children brought across the border are being trafficked. So this adult with this child that you found in the dark at night, where they're not supposed to be in a foreign country, you don't necessarily know if they're actually even related, or if the adult's just trying to take this child to sell them or something.
I do got a fact check on a couple little things there. Is that, yes, you are right. The cages were built during the Obama administration, but obviously the cages themselves is not the problem. It was Trump who specifically put in the child separation policy as a deterrent for people coming to the border in the first place. He wanted people to see that if you came to the United States, you're potentially going to lose your children, and that was set up as a deterrent. In the Obama administration, yes, they did detain families or folks who were coming over, but they kept them together and didn't separate them.
I think it was because of the court ruling that the transition to separation. I'll have to do more research, but
I would look up. So there's Trump. It's been an interesting thing. And I kind of, as he leaves office, you're going to get more inside stuff that kind of comes out. And I know people sometimes don't believe all of the stories, but it was, I think it was, Stephen Miller, he basically kind of come out defending it. And it's come out that that was the original plan. The original intention was to basically scare people from coming to the border, because if you come to the border, you're going to lose your kids. And that was the general plan. When Obama was deporting people, they were not separating the kids. And as you did bring up, trafficking is definitely a huge problem. I've actually worked with a lot of folks in and around sex trafficking, and that's obviously a huge problem at the border. But it's a bit of an over exaggeration, just kind of blanket that for everyone. Obviously, there's a lot of folks there are kids who are being trafficked across the border here and there, but by and large, a lot of traffickers, they want kids here. It's a very unfortunate, my work with trafficking, and I've worked with a lot of trafficking survivors, a lot of trafficking, folks who have become. Actually, a friend of mine was pardoned by Trump for crimes related to when she was trafficking. So it's something that I've worked with quite a bit. And the unfortunate reality is that traffickers, they want blonde-haired, blue-eyed white kids here in America. And so that's who they're mainly targeting. Obviously, there's kids that are brought up through the border, but by and large, they want kids that unfortunately probably look more like you than look like me.
Interesting. Yeah, it's I haven't had I've been fortunate enough to not have any direct interaction with the human trafficking stuff. That's fascinating.
And trust me, you don't want any. It's like,
No.
I've heard some of the most horrible stories that I had never thought. Yeah, it's one of the things that are so horrible that I myself was like, I need to take a little bit of time away from this, because there's evil out there. I mean, and trafficking really gets to that. And I do think one of the positive things that Trump did when he was in office was try to make trafficking more of a forefront for the federal government. He signed I believe it was an order called FOSTA, but it basically shut down websites like Backpage where kids were being sold. But it's one of those things that is like the core of evil. If you can stomach some of the stuff around trafficking, it's interesting, but it can be very sad to know that there's people out there like this. The last interview I did with someone, I don't know if you want this example or if people out there want this example, but yeah, like she, her mom was pimping her out for a while, and the mom would send someone over to the house, and her little brother was home, and she didn't want to do that with her little brother being home, and so the guy was like, well, I guess I'll go after the little brother did, and that's what he did. And there's just some horrible people out there. And it's one of those things, I think, as we talk about trafficking, I don't know if you've seen some of the QAnon stuff, but it's been kind of disappointing to me that, they're putting out so many conspiracy theories out there about Democrats being into pedophilia and trafficking kids. And it's really done a lot of harm to the fighting against trafficking, because if you talk to people about it, they're like, well, that's that QAnon thing, right?
It's an interesting association I hadn't heard or come across. I was familiar with the Epstein Island stuff, and was it the Lolita Express was the name of his airplane that went back and forth to the island. That was a big deal. I was confused. Everybody acted like it was new information when it became a big deal and he was getting arrested. And I'm like, I remember my parents in the 90s talking about this when Clinton was running.
Oh yeah, and it's one of those things. Yeah, it's strange because it seemed like people were not very surprised when all this came out about Epstein. And I think there is a conversation to be had there about his proximity to power and his ability to use that power to get away with things. Same thing with Weinstein. I think when this story came out about Harvey Weinstein initially, I'm not sure which news organization, I think it was NBC or ABC, but basically the reporter went to them to break this story and they didn't want to do it because it was Weinstein attached. So there's definitely a conversation to be had about proximity to power and being able to, put things under the rug.
Yeah, it's if the news doesn't report on it, it didn't happen. And that's unfortunately kind of the way the world we live in is, because so much of us experience the world kind of through these little square windows, these magic rectangles in our pocket, that you lose track of what is real, and you assume that, like, why would this little magic box lie to me? Of course everything in this is true.
Oh, for sure. There's definitely the information or who you listen to can definitely kind of I should say, like, inform your worldview, because you're just people are getting completely two different sets of information.
Yeah.
And as we kind of, pivot things around back to politics and religion and stuff, there's obviously been a lot of change online, a lot of changes in social media, and a lot of people kind of claim that conservatives, I'm not entirely sure if it's extends to religious conservatives, kind of being taken off social media. Have you seen any of that kind of going on?
Mostly, mostly the political circles. There is, depending on where you look, there's a large number of Christian groups that talk about being throttled on Facebook. But it's a lot of the shadow banning stuff where it's hard to really prove. They'll just see huge drops in numbers over time, and growth curves change, and a lot of it gets lost in like the algorithm shifting and stuff. But not specifically religious, but is it mostly in the political spectrum.
Absolutely. And yeah, I haven't seen as much religious kind of stuff being pulled down myself, but it's one of those things I know, and it's strange that, and it is kind of a strange to me to think that when you originally think like, Christian or religious, and immediately think conservative. Do you have any kind of insight on why that might be?
Because the Bible is, it all goes back to the Bible. So the whole point is, if Christianity is true, it's not going to change over time. The core of it, what is right, what is wrong, who is God, what is our relationship to God, and what does the Bible say? Those things aren't going to change over time. And so that's sort of the whole point of the conservative movement. That's what the language means. Progressives want to progress and to change things. Conservative wants to conserve and keep what was. And the whole point is that what was is good, and then the goal is to kind of change. Progressivism becomes a kind of a way to change everything that was good to everything that was bad from a conservative perspective. So if Christianity changes fundamentally over time, it sort of stops being what Christianity is, and it starts being some new and different thing. And so largely Christians are going to be conservatives because it's the framework.
Makes sense to me. And I have that does kind of maybe. Do you think as much about how the future of Christianity will move forward? One of the things I kind of thought was very interesting about the church that I go to is that, and it's a Lutheran church. I'm still kind of, like I said, I was just baptized a couple months ago, so I'm still figuring out a whole lot of stuff there. But one of the things I found was interesting is that they're kind of split. And there's half of the church that kind of sticks to traditional values. And then there's another half of the church that doesn't, that embraces gay marriage and embraces having like female pastors and stuff. So it does seem like part of, there's certain parts of the religion are changing. So it does seem like some people are adjusting to different kind of times now.
The question becomes whether or not those adjustments are good, because what the Bible teaches is clear, and the verses used to support those haven't really changed meaning. Like they're still in there, and for the past 2,000 odd years, the church has uniformly understood those verses to have one specific meaning. And then now there's a lean towards permitting gay marriage when homosexuality has been a sin for 2,000 years. Those verses haven't changed. The understanding of the Greek nuance wasn't lacking in the people that grew up reading and speaking Greek as their native language. They all uniformly believe that homosexuality is a sin. And so it's the changing with the times. It's really becoming something that's, like, oh, we like this Jesus character. No, we're not going to follow any of the other stuff in it. It stops being what Christianity is at a certain point.
And I do think as we've, it's interesting we haven't talked as much about gay marriage, but I think that is another thing that kind of, gets into this idea of separation between, church and state. The idea of, banning gay marriage, which I think in a lot of sense people want, even if they don't want to force churches to have to do gay marriages if they don't want to, but it's the idea that if someone is in a same-sex marriage, they can enjoy the same, legal protections that come with someone who isn't. And it does seem like, by and large, that even among conservatives, that gay marriage is something that has become accepted. And so it's interesting, whenever I talk with conservatives, they seem like they're way more interested and focused on abortion than gay marriage.
Um, so part of that's the difficulty. See, marriage is when a man and a woman come together, agree to be monogamous, and then have children. And so that word, once again, doesn't have a different meaning. As part of the sort of progressive mindset is that we can just use words willy nilly. It's fundamentally it's an outgrowth of relativism where things stop having definite truths and objective reality, and things become a lot more relative, where you can apply the word marriage to men who are incapable of having children, but they can be monogamous after their own way, I guess. And I don't think legislation should prohibit it, but that's it's its own sticky wicket. But because it's wrong in Christianity does not mean that it should be illegal, per se.
Right. That makes sense to me, and that's kind of where, again, talking about that idea of the separation of church and state, and the idea of like what should the government be involved in, what should they not be involved in. Another thing I've also found with conservatives is kind of a hard time around the abortion issue is that a lot of them believe that they don't want the government involved. A lot of conservatives kind of have that stereotype of wanting limited government. And so I've talked with folks who have a hard time balancing that around the abortion issue, because that is probably one of the biggest decisions that anyone's will ever make. And the idea of putting government in the room there seems like it's something that people aren't comfortable with.
It's because of a difference of framework, right? You're viewing it as a choice, and government is now having a say in that choice. When you view the act of abortion as infanticide, your decision is whether or not we should murder a baby. And that's the logic that's running. That's the conservative framework, is this is murdering a baby. So, I mean, yeah, murder is wrong. And the Bible teaches, thou shalt not kill. So, separation of church and state, murder shouldn't be illegal. The things that should be illegal are the things that affect when you have external effects to harm other people. And so murder falls under that. And that's the framework that's used. The argument then around abortion really is fundamentally, is this a human life? Because there's no decision then. There's a requirement to preserve that life. The same way, emergency rooms are required to treat people admitted, whether or not they can pay in that moment. And then that's dealt with after. The goal is to preserve human life. If someone's unconscious, your responsibility as the first aid provider is to assume they want you to help them survive. And so should be the same way for unborn children. But that's the logic going on, is they're not in that framework at all. This is murder. And so you're trying to say, should we decide to murder or not? That's the fundamental piece that keeps getting missed from the conversations for the conservative perspective.
Right. Is that for conservatives out there, this is or whether or not we're allowing murder to take place. And, again, I kind of disagree a little bit with that, framing it that way, but I certainly understand kind of what you're thinking here. And it's one of those funny things sometimes when you're talking about religion, and this is kind of what I was mentioning before with my pastor talking about, in his perspective, he thought it was a mistake for religious institutions to kind of get more involved with political issues. And so it's one of those things as we talk about things like, and we've talked about a lot of things during this, and we seem to kind of always pivot back to abortion. And so it's one of those things is the church kind of looks at going forward, and I've heard like a main tenet of Christianity is trying to spread the faith. If this kind of debate around this issue will kind of hurt that core tenet. It is a difficult balance. Abortion is an easy one. So I'm framing the conversation that way intentionally because that's the mental framework at play from a Christian worldview, is, as I understand it, derived from the Bible. And so I understand that's why I acknowledged your mental framework is this is a decision and then the government's being involved in that decision. And that's a different mental framework for the same issue. That's why I'm saying the ideas are inherently incompatible, is because they're coming from completely different mental frames of the same situation.
conservatives view it as an issue about murder, and we've already established the government's allowed to intervene in murder. So it's not about limited government in this moment for that specific issue, right? The argument actually applies much better to when it involves homosexual marriage, that the government shouldn't be involved. I don't think the government should have marriage licenses at all, because what happens in my bedroom is my business. But I like you're saying, there are protections involved as far as custody of children, ownership of homes and vehicles. When the sad event, a marriage falls apart, has to be some kind of structure or order for how do we manage this.
Absolutely.
And so I understand that from that perspective much more. But I totally forgot. But anyway, that's why I was framing it specifically, is because that's the headspace. The goal of Christianity isn't just to have a bunch of people that say they're Christians. The goal of Christianity is to have a maximum number of people actually adhere to the tenets of Christianity. And so if you're changing those tenets to get more people in the door, to an old pastorism, standing in a garage doesn't make you a car. Showing up and saying you're a Christian doesn't make you a Christian. Living as a Christian, read your Bible,
sure.
Pray every day, seek to follow God, and seek to live by the things that you find in the Bible that please God, and abstain from the things you find in the Bible that displease God.
Makes sense to me. And yeah, I mean, that does definitely make a lot of sense. And as we kind of, pivot, and again, as we go into, this new Biden administration, a lot of folks on the conservative side are very worried that these ideas of socialism are coming. We're going to become a socialist country. But there does seem to be some things that that maybe, some ideas with socialism that kind of match with maybe some of maybe Jesus's core tenets, and you're probably more versed on this than I am. But that whole idea of like loving thy neighbor, trying to support each other as like a community, and all this stuff seems to be kind of in some of these socialist ideas that people are throwing out there, versus capitalism, which is more of like a dog eat dog kind of mentality. So why is there some of that disconnect seeming? Because in a weird way, and I actually, maybe this is kind of how I frame the question. And I talked with my pastor. He did a whole sermon on this, and that the idea that is when you ask people about Christians, the first words that come to mind are judgmental, kind of backwards thinking, all these kind of horrible things. When really Christians are out, they're helping people, they're charitable, they're doing a lot of good work in their communities. But when they asked in this survey, they asked people, where do you get your information on Christians? And people said they base their opinions on other Christians that they know. And so sometimes, from like outside looking in, there can be a little bit of a disconnect between some of those ideas of Jesus helping the poor, again, loving thy neighbor, and it seems like what the kind of conservative right is kind of pushing for, which seems more like, capitalism, this kind of not helping the poor kind of society. And it just kind of seems like there's a big disconnect between those two.
So that's the issue, right? So socialism is it's interesting. So there's a separation, I think, from society and from government. Society is the people that all live here. Government is a system or structure that we give the authority to use a gun to tell you what to do. That's government, right? When somebody broke into my house and call the police, a man with a gun shows up and he makes that guy get out of your house. And he makes that guy get in his car, and he makes that guy go stand in front of a judge. And then people with guns make that guy sit in a little room for however many years. Fundamentally, that's what government is. And so the political discussions are, what is this man with a gun allowed to tell us what to do? And that's where, when we're talking about the, all right, socialism. Jesus' teachings are for people, not for governments. Romans 13, Paul specifically mentions that the government workers, soldiers, law enforcement, are ministers of God doing his work, and they carry the sword for a reason. That's not Christians. That's not what Christians are supposed to do. Jesus' teachings are for human individuals to live out in their daily life. What the Republican or conservative platform typically is what is the government allowed to tell me to do with a gun? And that's an important distinction then, because socialism as a government policy then means that man with a gun can come into your home and take your stuff and give it to somebody else. That's what taxes are. And so we'd like taxes to be as small as possible, because the people that are in need, the poor, the destitute, the hungry, that's the church's job to deal with them. There's a fun historical event. I don't remember the date off the top of my head. I think it's in the early 200 AD-ish ballpark in Rome. There was a huge earthquake, and Christians weren't mainstream yet. Was it Constantine comes around in like 300 AD, and everybody's like, oh, it's cool to be a Christian now. But it was before that a little bit. There's a huge earthquake, and a bunch of cities are devastated. And the Christian churches that are underground, still being kind of persecuted, show up and give relief aid better than the government did. It's we only know about it. It's a letter between a couple of like governors or praetorians or whatever they call them in ancient Roman times, that he's complaining. He's like, these Christians are making us look bad. They're taking care of all these destitute people better than we can. That's the way it's supposed to be. Christians are supposed to be active and engaged in their communities. The government shouldn't have any poor people to help. So many churches started putting food and bottled water on buses and sending it down every time there's a hurricane. They have to keep telling them to stop, because they're like, we don't know where to put this stuff. We don't have it. Churches, even nowadays, are really good at mobilizing. And there are whole nonprofit agencies that just coordinate church relief aid, because people keep just filling school buses with water bottles every time there's a hurricane. And that's the way it's supposed to be. Not a man with a gun saying, give water bottles to these poor people. And that's what socialism is fundamentally, is it's using the force of government, that gun, to make you be nice to people. We should be nice to others because we want to be nice to others. The government should use that gun to make sure people aren't being stupid and killing each other and stealing things. And that's where the government needs to be. So that's why the platform sounds very like, oh, dog eat dog, because I don't want the government telling me what to do with my business.
Sure. And I do think, obviously, it's one of those things in politics where, a lot of folks on the right are saying, hey, the left, they want absolute socialism. And I don't think anyone, obviously there's some people out there that want, pure socialism. But the majority, especially, Biden is absolutely not a socialist at all. And is very pushed back against a lot of these kind of socialist seeming kind of ideas. And really, in a way, I don't think that we need like full-on socialism. I don't think full-on socialism is a good idea. I think there's definitely good things about capitalism. But for me, it's more about like, society has moved in such a way, and there's kind of like, for me, the biggest problem in the country right now is income inequality. And that seems to be fueling a lot of strife amongst people. And it seems like the only way to potentially stop that or do something against that is embracing some socialist ideas or embracing some different kind of way of looking at things, because how we've been doing things for a long time isn't working. I saw an interesting thing around the pandemic that said something around 50% of millennials are living at home, which I thought was crazy and scary. And I think that there's a lot of young people that can't find these good paying jobs. There's a lot of folks obviously saddled with a lot of debt that's kind of hurting the economy. And our biggest problems now is we have income inequality. We have the corporatization of America, that I call it. I don't know if that's a term out there, but the idea is that because of the pandemic, small mom and pop businesses have gone out of business, and now it's big corporations like Walmart. You go walk into Walmart, and it's like there's a whole town in there. There's an eye doctor, there's some have video game arcades, there's a bank in Walmart. And so that's going to eliminate a lot of small businesses. And the last thing is automation, and the idea that machines are going to take over human jobs. And I'm sure you've seen that as someone, with your book talking to blue collar folks out there, saying that machines are coming in and doing the jobs of humans. So for me, the idea around socialism is that, we have a lot of big problems in the future, and the solutions of the past might not be able to solve them. We can only innovate so much and still hope to have jobs for people.
It's difficult to kind of address. Like, I mean, we're obviously talking about like the world's problems and what everybody should do.
Yeah, it's the big stuff here. Yeah. I should have said tangent alert. I was like, all right, I know I'm about to go off on a whole thing, but
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. What were I'm trying to remember the three now, so I don't get too sidetracked and to not kind of come around and address all. Oh, I'll start with automation because that's a little more my wheelhouse. My focus is mainly on trade skills and less on manufacturing, but I worked in a factory for a while. Yeah, robots weld stuff together, but you have to take the pieces and put them inside of the machine for the robot to weld together. And then the machine breaks every 5 minutes. And because a sensor is misaligned or got a bunch of slag on it from the welding, there's always stuff for people to do. But in the trade skills, you can't make a robot that can add a new outlet to the corner of your house. Because you gotta know if you have room in the panel, how many outlets are on the circuit, can I just steal power from a nearby light switch? All of these nuanced things, and that's just one trade, let alone plumbing and heating, ventilation, air conditioning. HVAC is the slang for that trade. There's a ton of stuff that all kind of interrelates. You can't program a robot to do that. It'd be hard to program a computer to be able to think around those problems. So I don't think
Not
automation
now.
is as impending of a threat. But
yeah, I mean, it's one of those things you can't do that now. But I remember, it's funny. People probably think I look real young, but this is my iPhone here. I remember before we had these things. And really, I think one of the crazy things about the iPhone is I think it came out in 2008, 2009. You just think of how fast we've come in like a decade.
I think it was earlier than that.
What technology is going to do for us in the future. But that's a whole nother tangent. But it does kind of maybe, as we're focusing on religion, which is kind of what your expertise in. What do you kind of see as the future of kind of Christianity in this country, as it seems like things are going more to a liberal kind of mind frame?
There are a couple of trends. Obviously, the biggest trend is in progressive denominations becoming progressive versus their historical conservative roots. There's also a trend that isn't being tracked properly, but I know a lot of people in the YouTuber-y internet space. There's a growing movement of young men that are becoming diehard Catholics. So that the difference is you get to such this progressive relativistic world where nothing makes sense and everything is the same, and a woman is the same as a man, but a man put a pair of pumps on and we have to pretend he's a woman now. And they look at that, and their backlash is to just like, give me the oldest ways. What's the oldest way? Roman Catholic, I'll take it. Like, give me 7. And they sign up for like the only Latin mass where their bishops criticize Pope Francis for being too much of a modernist. And so that's where a lot of the younger generation, that's a lot. I don't know if it's the majority, but there's a solid mass of them that are starting to move that direction and whiplash back to that or Greek Orthodoxy or Russian Orthodoxy. One of the Orthodox Catholic traditions is also getting a surge. They've always been massive minorities compared to all the other denominations, but they're seeing a spike in membership because of that, because of what you're talking about.
Yeah, that is interesting. I hadn't heard that as much, because I've seen, and I consider myself a moderate. Probably a lot of people who maybe watch this don't agree with that, but hey, that's where I usually line up. But and I hear more about churches going more liberal, so it's interesting to hear that some are kind of going the opposite direction.
Yeah, and it's not in the congregational sense, but in the individual sense. A lot of people have grown up without church or without any structure, and they're finding that structure is healthy. Well, as we were talking about, like diet and exercise, but for your spirit.
Makes sense to me.
Well, so
man, it's been okay.
The lag keeps messing with me. Sorry, but just to say, I think the majority of churches are moving towards the progressive direction. I don't think that's the proper way, and I don't think that's sound doctrine as brought from the Bible. You can do some exegetical backflips to get there, but I don't believe that's a sound way to read Scripture.
Makes sense. I mean, and this is I've actually learned a lot here. I've joked with my pastor, again, as I mentioned during this whole interview, that I didn't kind of grow up in a religious, background. And so for a little bit of some myself, I'm trying to like remember which parts of Jesus Christ Superstar matched up with whatever the pastor was talking about.
Nice.
It didn't go very
Kids'
well.
Bible is the trick. When I was in Bible college, a lot
Kids'
of
Bible's the trick.
people had only been a Christian for 2 years. A lot of times, it was not uncommon for only like 2 or 3 years in, suddenly they go to ministry, and they go to Bible college, and they have no foundation. And a lot of them, like I'm watching grown people, they got a kid's Bible because it's really simple, but it's all the highlight stories everybody already kind of knows about. And you can, as an adult, just burn through a kid's Bible in an afternoon, and you have a good picture of sort of the beginning to end, the whole story of the book. So then when you're reading, you're like, oh, that's that guy. Okay, Goliath. All right. And it helps you already have sort of a framework to kind of slot these stories in as you learn them.
Makes sense. Yeah, makes sense to me because I've been lost, but I am happy to say I do have a favorite parable now. The one of the lost, I believe it's the Lost Samaritan, or no, the parable of the something Samaritan.
The Good Samaritan.
Good Samaritan. There you go. Yeah, that's it. Like I said, I'm still learning. Well, like I said, man, this has been an awesome kind of thing. Like, talking about these, religious things isn't like my focus with the YouTube channel, but I think it's cool stuff. And if you are just kind of joining us, you should definitely check out the Blue Collar Blind Spot. Can you tell people where they can pick this up?
That is at followtheleader.1/book. Follow the leader, all lowercase, all together. Followtheleader.1. One is ONE. Followtheleader.1/book. And that's it's about how there's a blind spot in the mainstream evangelical media that's really missing the blue collar heart in a practical way. In their language, their messaging is missing blue collar language, blue collar culture, and largely church activities take place where blue collar schedules kind of prohibit it. Anybody who works an odd evening shift or a weekend, they basically can't go to church activities, and so that there's a couple of different factors that come together that I call a blind spot.
Makes sense there. Sorry, the dog wanted to come by and say hey, so I'm like, all right, I got whining, so I got to pick him up. Anyway.
No complaint.
But hey, man, it's been great talking to you. I definitely appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your perspective.
Yeah, no problem.
Absolutely.
Good talking with you.
All right, well, thanks again for checking out this episode of the show. And again, I'm going to try to do interviews on Fridays kind of going forward. So stay tuned for that. If you haven't already, do me a favor, subscribe to Citizen Pete, and have a good weekend, y'all.